Well, hello everyone. It's wonderful to speak with you again today. As Derek said when he read the subtitle of my presentation today, Acceptance, Day 26, to complain or not to complain, and he added that as the question. He, of course, was making a reference to Hamlet and his famous soliloquy, to be or not to be. And of course, um, that's going to come in a little bit into this presentation, actually. In fact, it's the first thing. So I put up there to complain or not to complain, and then below it I've listed just an excerpt from that long soliloquy, one that is, when it comes to literary criticism, right, it's one of the favorites, because there's all kinds of interpretations of that entire soliloquy. And if you're a literary nerd who likes to engage in literary criticism, like me, you could spend a lifetime talking about the finer points of this wonderful piece of literature. But I'm only going to focus actually on this one little sentence, and that's why I put this quote up here. So, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. So, I put this up here because the part I want to actually refer to is the part about, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. And I'm not going to talk about this, whether or not Hamlet was suicidal or not, or whether he was talking about his inability to act or not act or whatever. That's not really what I'm getting into. But the reference has always been interesting to me. The idea of taking arms against the sea of troubles. And, thinking about, well, what was Shakespeare talking about when he put that phrase in there, take arms against the sea of troubles? And that, of course, is open, like everything else in this soliloquy. It's open to interpretation. But one of the interpretations of it has to do with the story. And whether or not the story is true or fictional is really unknown, but it's kind of one of those legends that's passed on through time. And apparently it's the story of a king who basically, there's different versions of the story, but I'm going to give you the one that I'm most familiar with. It is said this king wanted to explain to people the limits of temporal power, even for a king. And so he put his throne by the seashore and ordered his noblemen and his army to keep the tide from coming in and wetting his feet, which of course is impossible. And it's said that this wise king did this to demonstrate to his kingdom that it's futile to rage against the sea. And as the story goes, he then hung his crown on the throne and said that he was giving his crown over to the Lord Jesus, because obviously this is from a Christian culture. But the point was that he was, and as the story goes, he never put the crown on again. And so it was a symbol of accepting his limitations and giving over to a higher power. And to me, when I done literary criticism on this piece of literature, I always remember that part of it. Probably because when I first memorized this soliloquy in 7th grade, the first teacher who ever taught me about it taught us about that story and how he thought it was a reference to it. And so that's always stuck with me. And you might say, well, what does all this have to do with the topic of acceptance? Well, in some ways, life is like a sea. It comes upon you, you're in it, and it really is futile to complain about the fact that the shore has come up and wet your blanket, that you were laying on, sunning yourself in or so forth, because you can't stop the sea. It doesn't matter how powerful your army is, or how many noblemen you have, or how much temporal power you possess. The sea is coming, and the sea can mean all kinds of things. It can mean time itself, right? No matter how healthy you are, time is going to march on, and you're going to grow old and get sick and die. It awaits us all, sooner or later. That's just one example. But the reality of it is, we don't accept the coming and going of the tides. Instead, what most people do is we complain about it. We whine about it. We talk about the injustice of this high tide coming in on me and washing all my stuff away or whatever. That's what a lot of us do. We spend a lot of time and energy complaining about us, complaining about others. And of course, with Taoism, it's about self-transformation. It's about you taking control of your destiny and your life. And you say, well, how can I take control over a destiny where the sea is going to come? How can I have control? How can I have control over my destiny in a place where tides come and go? Well, I truly believe that you can. But it does involve acceptance. As Bill said in the beginning of that great talk he just gave about knowing thyself, he said, the wishing, the wanting, the desiring. There's nothing wrong with any of those things in and of themselves. It's okay to wish, to want, and to desire. But here's the thing, and I think this is really, in the beginning there, what Bill was driving at. He put it in terms of, hey, you're likely to never get off the couch if that's all you do. And boy, was he right. To me, wishing and wanting and desire is one thing, but those are kinds of things that generally don't ever get out of your head until you do this other thing. And that's that you decide. You decide to pay the price for the things you want, desire, and wish. And once you do that, then you can get to the work of accomplishing them. And then those things that you wish, desire, and want will get out of your head and manifest in the real world. But you have to accept what's there. You have to work with what's already there. And as I said in another talk, I think the one on limitless potential, we're born with everything we need for this manifestation we find ourselves in. We're born with everything we need. You're born with everything you need to fulfill your destiny. Now, yeah, are there differences between all of us? Sure, some are smarter than other people. Some people are more physically gifted. We all have different talents. That stuff kind of tends to not matter so much. There's the X factor. And that's taking your abilities, whatever they are, accepting them for what they are. And rather than complaining about what they're not, focus on what you have. Be grateful for what you have. And use what you've been given to create the destiny that works best for you. That's how you become a limitless person. And that's really what this talk is about. It's about accepting the wonderful gift of our lives. And it is such a great gift. But that's kind of what I was driving at when I brought in this Shakespearean quote here, my favorite of mine. And so basically what I'm saying is it's wonderful to let yourself sort of be a twig on a mighty stream. And that's what I think of the Tao. I think of the Tao as a mighty stream. And it's good to be a twig immersed in that Tao or riding that Tao. Accepting what's there. And so, in a lot of ways, acceptance is about going with the flow. But as all of us know, because Derek is very good at pointing it out, but a lot of the go with the flow idea is very easily misunderstood. A lot of people, the idea of going with the flow really appeals to them because they latch onto this idea that, hey, if you just go with the flow, you don't have to do anything. I can just sort of sit on the couch all day and go with the flow. And, hey, like Bill said, we live in a world with actions and consequences. And the action and the consequence of going with the action of just going with the flow and sitting on the couch isn't going to be, you're not going to get the wishes out of your head or the desires out of your head or the wants out of your head if you do that. It's not until you figure out what it costs to have those wants, wishes, and desires and decide to pay it and then get to the business of actually paying it that you're going to get anywhere. And we have the freedom to decide what we want. Bill recently, I don't know, within the last few months, gave a talk and he talked about how, temporal wealth has never been something that he, really longs for, but he's quite content with his life as the way it is. And I know what he means. I feel much the same way. I mean, I certainly would be happy to have more wealth or whatever, but at the same time, gosh, if I'm honest, I'm pretty happy with the way things are right now. And looking back in retrospect, I see how fortunate I am to the way things have always been. Might have been a little smoother for me if I hadn't swum against the stream so much and accepted it sooner. Acceptance. Accepting the life. Accepting yourself for who you are. That's an important thing. But it doesn't mean not doing anything. So if that's not what going with the flow means, well, what does acceptance and going with the flow really mean? I mean, let's talk about it. So going with the flow means accepting the simplicity of the world just as it is. Now, it's easy to turn on a newscast, pick up a newspaper, turn on a radio show, turn on your phone, right? Because all those things come at us at the media, and look at the world and go, oh, so much injustice, so much suffering, so much awful. Why does it have to be this way? But that doesn't help anything. It's okay to be cognizant of the reality, but you also have to accept the reality. And instead of devoting energy to wailing about injustice and suffering and horror and everything else, it's better to take action and do something. As easy as this should be, it is not. How do we know? Well, just listen to people. Really sort of be the fly on the wall as much as possible if you can, and listen to people. How many sentences can most people utter before they're complaining about someone or something? Then be honest. And like Bill said today, be brutally honest. Then ask ourselves, how many sentences can we make before we start to complain? How can we decide that we want to use that energy in a better way? Decide and then start doing it. To avoid complaining, we have to accept the futility of the practice. Complaining accomplishes nothing anyway, does it? And it's funny too. Complaining doesn't feel good at all if you don't have someone to complain with and to, right? Ugh, boy, we just love to get together with our like-minded friends and complain away. And there's all kinds of ways we can complain. We can be cynical. We can use humor. But in the end, no matter how we disguise it, whether it's through being funny or part of our shtick or whatever, in the end, we're complaining. And that doesn't further anything. That doesn't help us. Better to accept and then decide, how can we change it? By just using what we have to fulfill the destiny we're meant to fulfill, the one we've decided. It's better to accept the world as it is and then use the energy devoted to complaining to make a better world. That's really the message. That's really what going with the flow means. Now, on Taoism.net, and I think it's actually the older version of the site, but I know that if you type in Shangsu waterfalls in the Tao, one of the first search results you'll get in Google is a link to the old page where Derek writes the story of the waterfall. It's a story by Shangsu and Confucius, about Confucius. And I'm just going to really briefly tell it, but I wanted to tell you guys how to get to the full story if you've never read it, because Derek wrote it down very skillfully and wrote a wonderful commentary about it. But just briefly, Confucius is walking with his students, and one of them asks him if he's ever been to this place, which I'm not going to pronounce because I'll butcher it. But it's a land of many majestic and powerful, beautiful waterfalls. And Confucius says, no, I've never been there, but I've always wanted to go. He says, well, Master, what if we go take a walk? It's only about 2 hours from here. Let's walk. Let's go see it. And he thinks it's a great idea. And so they all start walking toward this waterfall. And one of them says, you know, I love waterfalls. I grew up around waterfalls. They were fun to swim in the summer. And the other person says, well, these waterfalls aren't quite like that. These are very powerful waterfalls with a tremendous force in them. And Confucius says, yes, that's right. Even turtles and fish, you know, can't swim near these waterfalls, and they're used to being in water. But the power of the water is so forceful that they can't even work in it. And so they're talking about all this, and as they get closer and closer to the waterfall, they discover upon looking on it that there's a man at the bottom of the waterfall being thrown around by the current. And Confucius and everyone collectively gasps, and they go, come on, let's go. We got to try to save this guy. Maybe he's a suicide. Maybe he slipped and fell. We need to go see if we can help him. And they're not quite there yet, so they're running frantically to get there. And one of them says, Master, by the time we get there, he's, you know, there's going to be nothing left. There's nothing we can really do. And Confucius says, you may be right, but, you know, a man's life is at stake, so we should give it our best shot. So sure enough, they finally do get there. And when they get there, this man who was seemingly being thrown around by this powerful force of water is on the edge of the shore, and he's got his hair fanned out, and he's relaxed and just as happy and as unharmed as could be. And Confucius sort of comes to him and says, hey, we thought you were in trouble, but obviously you're fine. And, you know, now that we see that you're fine, we're tempted to think that you're a supernatural being of some sort, but in actuality, you're just a man, just like us. And the man says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I grew up around here. I know this water. I've been working with it since I was born, really. These powerful currents don't hurt me because I go with them. When the mighty force pushes me down, I don't resist against it. I go with it. And I anticipate that it'll change and come upward again, and I'm ready to get into position and move up with it when the time is right. So I work naturally with this water. And he points out that he doesn't have any special skills or anything. He just works with the nature of the water. And then, of course, Derek finishes up the story and goes on to give a wonderful commentary, which I encourage you all to seek out and read. But it's such a wonderful story about what it means to accept the currents of life and to just go with them. Work with the nature that we have, both the internal nature that we've been given and the external nature. And that's really what going with the flow is. Okay, so I'm going to start to sum it up here. So the reality is that the world is filled with a sea of troubles, just as Shakespeare stated in Hamlet. And once we realize and accept that beating back a sea is impossible, we can navigate that sea of trouble skillfully by accepting the reality and using our energies to make our world a better place. Instead of accepting limitation and complaining about it, we have to accept our limitless potential and act to fulfill those potentials. We do that by deciding, not just wishing, wanting, and desiring, but deciding to do what will get us our wishes, our wants, and our desires. Because I truly believe that all of us have a desire to be the best we can be. It's the most natural thing there is to be the best you can be. And that is to just be what you are. And then life really does become fun and full of joy. You know, more and more, I realize that anything we do in life, we can do it in a way where it can be joyful. I mean, I look at the things I have to do day to day, to put food on the table for my family and a roof over our own head and keep well, in my case, the air conditioning on, rather than saying the heat on. It's more apropos to say to keep the air conditioning on. Sometimes you have to do some mundane tasks. But when you look at it correctly, even mundane tasks can be fun. And if you look at the past of your life, you can talk about all the bad things that happened to you and complain about it and the injustice of it all. But you know what? And there may be, hey, look, you may have a legitimate beef. In fact, I'm sure we're all convinced we do. But you know what? The wonderful thing about the Tao is, and this is true of how you live your life, but also how you look at the past, you get to choose how you want to remember it. You can work with your mind and your body, because I believe in this incarnation, this time and space, those two things are inseparable anyway. You can work with your mind and body to look at the past, the present, and the future in the way that you choose. That's really what fulfilling our destiny and the ultimate self-transformation is, realizing our true selves. And yeah, it's work in a sense, but it's fun work. To me, it's fun work. This means going with the flow and accepting our lives for what they are. Going with the flow does not mean doing nothing. A lot of people wish it did, because doing nothing's easy. It's really easy. But it means working with the currents that life has in store for you. Think of the Confucian story about the man and the waterfall. The power of those currents can be used when you're in line with it, when you go with it, versus raging against the stream, which, look how many people rage against the stream. Or if you're like me, if you can look at your past life and go, look how I raged against the stream. What does that do? Well, it tears you up, actually. It's better to go with it. Go with the power and float like a twig on the shoulders of a mighty stream, the stream of the Tao, so to speak. In short, replace to complain or not to complain with to take action or not to take action. The best choice is to devote our energies to taking the right actions at the right times. That's how we fulfill our destiny and achieve self-transformation, really, by accepting and doing the right things at the right time. So that's it. I want to end with a book recommendation. As always, a great book, The Tao of Joy Every Day, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action. So there it was, Acceptance Day 26, to complain or not to complain. That, my friends, is the question. Thank you so much for listening to what I had to say today. I hope I said something that was helpful, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.